Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning, Sanbonani, Molweni, Ninjani. I hope everyone is good. So I didn't have this conversation yesterday because I sometimes I challenge myself. So sometimes I feel these conversations are quite challenging, and I do have my moments where I feel, is everyone listening? Because you guys don't give me any feedback. You just keep quiet. So I don't know if the men are listening or not, because these conversations are for you, either older men or younger men. So I'm not sure if you're listening. Please give me some indication, even if it's a private inbox. I know you guys like doing things in the shadows. So please give me some indication that you are there and listening, so that at least I know I'm talking. Even if it's just one person, just give me an indication that you are there and listening. So in this morning's 4-man conversations, I want to talk about young men and suicide, or young men and depression, or young men and stress, because depression needs to be diagnosed before we can call it as such. But I'm just going to talk based on all the feedback that I get in my space. So I coach young men, young adult men, as much as people know me as a teen coach, but I started coaching by working a lot with adults, young adults. And then when I saw some of the issues and challenges that young adults were grappling with, I realized that some of these things could have been handled at a very younger age. And then that's when I left the young adults to work with the teenagers. Then at teen level, I also realized, some of these things that teenagers are going through could have been dealt with at a younger age. Then I went to the preteen. So I started teen coaching because of that particular need, which was driven by working with the young adults. So along my journey of working with preteens and teens, I then went back to take on young adults. But I'm going to say that working with the young adults, especially the young adult men, is a challenging space for different reasons. It's a challenging space for different reasons. One of it being that we have seen the stats that is often the younger age groups in men that commit suicide the most, or that die by suicide the most. I'm still learning the terminology, so please always forgive me. It's often young adults, young men who die by suicide the most. in my space where I get parents approaching me to support young adults men, I find that most of the young adults that are coming through to me are coming through when they're already depressed and they don't want to talk to anyone, and they are at a space where they are trying to show a front that says we are okay, and yet in most cases they're not okay. And I think the most saddest part of it, sometimes I get young adults, young men who have already crossed the brink of a chemical imbalance or a chemical breakdown in the brain where they've crossed over to a now diagnosed mental illness. And often that's when parents seek the help, which doesn't help because once it's on that side, you need other different types of medical interventions and. So the reason I'm having this conversation this morning is that I'd love to see more fathers intervening in the space of young adult men, because in most cases it's mothers who come to me for their sons, and by that time mothers have already done so much to try and help the situation. When we try to get the dads involved, the fathers give us a block, or the fathers they create a block of sorts, they run, they hide, and so in this conversation I want to talk to fathers in terms of how you can get involved in terms of supporting your young adults men. It doesn't help that a lot of fathers often do not have a relationship with their sons. Besides the provision of money or the provision of their needs, often there isn't much bonding that has happened between the father and the sons, which often makes some of the situations a little bit more deeper. So, from the backdrop, the notes that I created is that when it comes to fathers and it comes to sons, there's a couple of things that are very common, in terms of if the son, the young adult man, is going through a rough time or going through a rough phase. How you know that it's bad is when the young man is self-destructive. Alcohol sometimes can be a sign of a person who's self-destructive, especially when there's nothing else happening in their lives except the alcohol. Self-destructive in the sense that there's binge drinking, there's the binge in drinking then kind of progresses to spaces where the young person just doesn't remember anything about that particular weekend or week of binge drinking, and they don't know where they were, who they were with, and it happens on a constant basis. Then it's a sign of being self-destructive, or a sign that they're trying to use alcohol to numb whatever they might be going through in their lives. And also, how you know it's that stage is because if there's nothing else happening in their lives, that's the most common trait. For an example, they are not in school, they are not working, all of their friends are not available, they've got nothing else happening in their lives, then you pay attention. The other thing that's very common is that with the young men, when mothers, because this is often mothers, when moms try and ask them if they need help, most of the time they respond in aggressive ways. If your son responds in aggressive manner, like, I don't need help, I'm gonna be fine, or I'm trying to make things work, or some sort of pie in the sky type of plan that just doesn't materialize, then it means that there's something that aggressive type of response then means that you need to pay more attention to that. What then tends to happen, though, unfortunately, is that the fathers and sometimes the moms then think of a way to support this young person by giving them money, so that when they're with their friends, they don't look bangahleleleki, they don't look like they're struggling, or they don't seem like they're struggling. So they try and give them things. What those things just do is that it becomes like a cover that covers an open wound that is bleeding. So you're offering all this money and all these things, material things, to make them feel like they're okay, and yet inside there's a bleeding wound that's continually bleeding, and no one is taking care of that wound. That's what money in this situation does. It doesn't help. And then the other thing that I added to my notes is oh, The other thing that young men tend to do is to hide. They hide themselves physically, as in they would stay in their rooms. I mean, there is that phase at teen ages where teens just prefer being in their rooms all the time. That's okay, but at a young adult stage, it should have a way in terms of having other things that the young person has, like a job, work, studies, and peers. But if they're constantly in their rooms, they're constantly sleeping, constantly they're not bathing. That's the common thing with young men. They not bathing, and they refuse to take a bath. When you notice that it's almost a week and they have not bathed, and you ask them, and they respond in that aggro manner, that's when then you realize, good, something is not right. So, because I don't want these videos to be too long, so how can fathers get involved? The complexity in fathers getting involved will depend on the relationship that you have with your son from the jump, the relationship that you have with your son. If, because this happens a lot in South Africa, for some reason, fathers who are not married to the moms and who currently have young adults um, tend to have created a foundation that said, I will connect with my child when they are older and when they can understand me. It's something that many in South Africa have been doing for a while, where they say, I'll connect to my child when they are older. So it becomes then difficult for fathers to, because what then moms do when the sons are going down a depressive self-destructive pattern, often the mothers then, that's when they challenge themselves to reach out to the fathers, even if they've never spoken to the fathers before. But because the mothers feel the pressure, they then challenge themselves to try and to reach out to the fathers, because then they feel this child maybe needs the dad, or needs the izinto zakowabo. This is how we communicate it. But then the fathers, based on guilt, I'm going to say guilt, they tend to also respond in an aggressive manner to the mom, because indlela omkhulise ngalo umspoilile, ummoshile umntana, now you want me to be involved. It becomes messy. But then my point for this conversation is to say one thing. First part, if you've never had a relationship with your son and you get a call from the mom that the son is not well and is going through a rough time, first thing first, before you jump in and scold and shout at your son for giving the mom grief, step back a bit and take the first step of acknowledging your absence in your child's life. That's the first part that you do. Acknowledge to your son the absence, because it has to start there before anything else. It has to start there. I know, because it's an emotional space, it becomes difficult for fathers to stand in that space, to hold the space for the son, to say, I'm the one who chose absence and you are going through a rough time. Often fathers respond in an aggressive manner to the son, to say, ungangideleli, blah, 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 because that macho aggressiveness plays a role, because you're also trying to hide the guilt and the shame that you're feeling as a man, that you've never been there for your son. So first things first, please acknowledge your absence. Either to yourself first, because I think sometimes you guys convince yourself that your absence was a good thing and it wasn't a good thing. Acknowledge it to yourself first, and then acknowledge it to your son before you address how they're looking, how bad and how horrible their state is. Before you address all of that, acknowledge your absence. No? You are going to get a kickback from your son. No ways, no two ways. It's either they're going to completely ignore you, or they're going to completely give you their anger. You need to be at a space where you hold that anger in without fighting back. Because I think the challenge with most men is that you don't want to see the aftermath of all the decisions that you've made. So you want to run. And the next place to run away is that aggressive space of saying, but in that so whatever happens, respect me. It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. So please hold that anger in and be consistent in being present in that anger that your child gives you, because they need to offload that anger. You need to be consistent being in that space. You can't run away all the time. You ran away when your child was born. You ran away when they were preteens. You ran away when they were teenagers. And now in the young adult stage, this need you still want to run away. It's not on. Hold it and be there. If you don't know how to hold space for your young adult who's going through a rough time, you can reach out to me and I'll take you through the process and I will hold your hand while you hold the space for your son. It's important. It's important. Secondly, if your family is big on rituals, imbeleko, ukwamkela umntwana, and all of that, if your family is big on those rituals, hold that thought in your mind, but don't show those things at your son as the first conversation. As the first conversation. Hold that thought in your mind, but don't show those things as the first conversation. For an example, the mom calls you to say, come and intervene. And you say, it's because lo mntana akenzelwanga amasiko asekhaya, na, ubuphi, tata, ubuphi. You see what I mean? So go through that state of the anger first, and then find out from your son how he wishes that you intervene or take space in their lives. It can be quite complex because situations are not the same and young men are not the same. So they will respond to this thing quite differently. So I'm being general here so that at least you have some base. But each and every person handles this very, very differently. But then, if then the whole rituals thing is part of your family, then have a conversation with your family. Acknowledge to your family also the things that you didn't do that you were supposed to have done. And then, because we're an African family unit, before you run to your son to talk about rituals that might not have been done, talk to the mom first and the family of the mom first, so that you have that done properly, that conversation, that anger, that you must hold space for it, guys. You must create a room in your heart and in your mind and in your emotions and in your spirit for that, because it's gonna come at you. But it's the right thing to do. Now that you've stopped running from this, it's the right thing to do. Listen to the mom, listen to the mom's family with regards to what they think should be the next phase in terms of if you do the whole ritual side of things. Once you and the mom and the family of the mom have agreed on a way forward, you then address things with the young men, because your young men might not want those rituals or might be open to them, because also that's a different conversation. Just because we as adults believe in one thing doesn't mean that our kids will believe in the same thing. So that conversation needs to be had in a very tolerant and open manner. And then what else? The third limit, I'm checking my notes. How fathers can, I'm going to take questions if there are any questions. Also, maybe I didn't mean this to be a talk around absent fathers. Okay, I'm going to come to fathers who are fully present. The other last bit to address the absent fathers is that because this comes up a lot in my space, if your family has a history of mental illnesses, it is your duty and your role to show up in your child's life from the get-go in some form. Because if your family has a known and an evidence-based history of having mental illnesses on the masculine side of your family, you owe it to your son. You owe it to your son to try and intervene as early as possible, so that your son doesn't fall in the same pattern, in the same cycle. It's important. I could talk more about this because it's close to my heart, but I won't. If you need to talk more about this, you reach out to me and I'll say more. And then lastly, with the parents, the fathers who are married and present, I find that for you guys, it's much more common for you to spend most of your time working for your families, to a point where you don't spend much time with your families. Then you find that I hear this from teen boys. A lot of say, my dad is there, but he's not there. So if you notice later on that your son is create space for your kids, create space, take them with you into when you're doing things. Make it a practice to involve them in your busy work life in some form. There's lots of things that people can do now, like going golfing with your sons, going biking with your sons, going I mean, a lot of things, even taking them out, the soft things, like taking them out and just having dinner with them, just presence. Because sometimes I feel like teens and young adults, men, sometimes all they need is the presence of the other parent around, so that they don't feel like they are alone in the world. I'm gonna stop here because my time, I've crossed over with 5 minutes younger. I just want to check if there are any questions, and then I'm going to I'm gonna stop. Let me just check if there are no questions. If there are no questions. Okay. A question, a father can be absent while present. What do you mean by that? All right. That's a good question. That's a good question, Putwami. So the act of being a father who is absent while you're living with your children every day is the fact that you don't have conversations with your son and your kids. And by conversation, I don't mean conversations where you are instructive all the time. So when you spend most of your listen to yourself and observe yourself, if everything that you say to your kids is instructive all the time, like did you wash my car, did you do the garden, did you do your homework, those are instructive conversations. Whereas often children, what they need is someone who's going to say, but how was your day today, your teacher, where you spend time together, you do the garden together. So you want the garden to be done by your child, but instead of you being instructive in doing that, you then say, let's go and do the garden together. That's presence, because you're doing things together. So the act of being absent while present means that you are in the house but you don't see your kids. You don't acknowledge their presence. You don't acknowledge when they are sad or happy. When they have happy moments, you don't celebrate their happy moments, because ungena endlini uphuma endlini ngo-6 ekuseni, you come back at 8 p.m., you sleep, and you repeat that pattern throughout. So the act of being present means that you are fully present in spending time with them, in having meaningful conversations with them, in alerting them when you are also not doing well, in also talking to them in terms of helping them to understand your history as a dad, where you're coming from. And I think that's the one thing I think might be my next topic, with regards to that. Help them understand where you're coming from, where you grew up, without you being instructive and shouting all the time. Because I find that we tell our kids our history when we are angry, when we feel like they're lazy, and and therefore Tina, we're not this lazy. I grew up very tough. That we often give our history to our kids when we are feeling some kind of pressure. Whereas what I'm asking you to do is to say, when everything is nice and happy, create that time to have a conversation with your kids, in a way that's going to make them know what, okay, this is my dad. The question is from Obosomzi, is it possible to overparent? My first instinct is to say no, but then it would help for me to have an idea of what overparenting do. But I do know that sometimes one of the things I'm often against is when parents load more on their kids in the guise of wanting to make their kids their friends. For an example, I see mothers make this, even fathers do this a lot, where you tell your kids all of your problems in a way that doesn't filter it. For an example, you tell your kids the person that you're dating, and you tell them that you're also dating another person, but you involve your kids in lying to their mother about these situations that you're in, and then you also create situations where if you are dating as the father, you're dating 4 women at a time, you get your kids involved in how you dupe these women in terms of timing and taking them out. So you get your child involved. I would call that over parenting because I don't know any other way to put it, in the sense that you see it as involving your kids, but you're involving them in the wrong things and in the wrong manner, because then you are teaching them other traits that you wouldn't want a child to have, or you're opening up your kids to things that they should not be, because now you are teaching them things that are going to go against the values and that you might be teaching them. So that could be seen as overparenting, but when it comes to spending time with your children, I'll say, I'll make an example with myself. My dad had this thing when we were kids where he would take me with him everywhere he went, which used to annoy my mom, because then it means my dad, if he's going out to his friends, Sasa around 7 a.m., he would get me into the car ndihambe naye the whole day, and mama used to be afraid, did I eat, but then that's what my dad enjoyed doing. So he would almost take me with him everywhere. Now that I'm older, I don't see that as over parenting, because those were the times where we created our deepest bonds. And I have fond memories of my dad and my childhood because of that. And interestingly enough, even though my mom would be worried that have I eaten or not, my dad had a good plan on how to take care of me during those trips, those random trips that he used to do. So I would say it's not possible to overparent. It might be what your child needs in order for their soul evolution to happen as well, because that's the other thing. I think a part of my growth and understanding of my full purpose stemmed from the number of times that I've spent with my dad to understand him. And I think the reason why I'm so effective in working with boys and working with young men is because of the amount of times that I've spent with my father when I was a child. We were inseparable, and as such, I understand my father more. I understand the males more because of how I grew to observe and the spaces I used to be in. I'm the type of child where if my dad was a ship-in, I'll be there in the ship-in with him, observing and looking at the men around him and the conversation that they used to be having. That's how I grew up until my teenagers, 14, 15 years of age. So I would say, no, you can't overparent, in short. Let me see if there's another question. Second last question, how does one do this father thing? When I grew up without a father, Baba, there is an assumption that is done by society where it says women are the more naturous and that men are not. And I'm going to say that is not true. Based on how I grew up, because I grew up more closer with my dad. You have to trust your instinct, Nekaba, and not go against what society is saying. You have to trust your instinct. You have to trust your instinct. As a child who grew up without a father and you grew up to become a father, you know what you needed when you were a child and your father wasn't there. You know what you needed when you were a child and your father wasn't there. You know the moments that you needed. So play those things out with your kids. Create the moments. I think this is something my father used to say. My dad grew up without his father. His father passed away before he was born. So my dad used to say to us that he doesn't want us to grow up without him because yena ukule without dada wake. So little things, I'll give you an example. Little things my dad used to do for us is he would cook for us. And it was very common in our household. He would cook for us, and we would watch soccer together, Songe Kaya, the kids, because it was my dad and us, the first four kids, we would watch movies together. We used to watch those, or Rambo, all those movies together. So my dad would look for activities for us to do. And then also one of my personal favorites was I would read the newspaper with my dad on Sundays. So follow your instinct. Find a way to trust your instinct, the fatherly instinct, that you would know what to do and how to parent your child, as long as you're also open to being guided as well. Because I find that when men don't know how to father their kids, they tend to be afraid to ask for help. And I love that you're asking. They tend to be afraid, and then they tend to respond in an aggressive manner when their partners say, but you're not doing it, you know. So sometimes allow yourself to be guided by another person, but also find your instinct, which might go against society. That's the other thing. It might go against society because society has often given an imprint that says this is how you father, and often it's that imprint might be toxic. So find a way to go against society and listen to your instinct in how you need to father your own kids. I think that's the last question. Let me see in the page if I have any questions there. Okay, so this is going beyond 20 minutes. I'm going to shut it down quickly. I just want to check in my page if there are no questions before I run out. And I'm only taking questions from fathers, ne? Okay, perfect. That's all. Thank you so much for listening. 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 And I am happy. Thank you so much for listening.